October 1964. Oakland, California. The address was not public, and the doors were locked from the inside. 5 men stood between Bruce Lee and the exit. None of them were students. None of them were smiling. One of the witnesses, later identified only as Tom H., a local gym owner, remembered the room feeling too small for what was about to happen. What followed lasted 13 seconds. No police report was filed. No photographs were taken. Bruce Lee never described it in detail, and those who were present disagreed on why it started. They did not disagree on the ending. When it was over, 2 men were on the floor, one was holding his arm in a way arms are not meant to bend, and no one moved to stop Bruce as he stepped back. The method was never discussed. Only the silence afterward, and the way Bruce's hands were shaking. 1964, Oakland, California. At the time, Bruce Lee was not yet a star, not yet a myth, and not yet protected by the distance that fame provides. He was 24 years old, teaching privately, demonstrating publicly, and moving through martial arts circles that were still rigidly guarded by tradition and suspicion. Oakland was not Hong Kong. It was not Hollywood. It was a city of dockyards, boxing gyms, converted warehouses, and small rented halls where physical reputation mattered more than written lineage. Martial artists there did not argue in journals or magazines. They tested each other behind closed doors, sometimes formally, sometimes not. Bruce's reputation had begun to unsettle people. He was Chinese, but he taught non-Chinese students openly. He demonstrated technique stripped of ceremony. He spoke bluntly about inefficiency in classical forms. To some instructors, he was disrespectful. To others, dangerous, not because he claimed superiority, but because he questioned the structure that gave them authority. A former student, later interviewed in the late 1970s, described the mood surrounding Bruce that year as curious, but tense. According to him, Bruce's demonstrations were drawing mixed crowds, young athletes eager to learn, and older practitioners watching closely, waiting for a mistake. The controversy was not abstract. In 1964, martial arts were still bound to identity, loyalty, and territory. Teaching methods were not just techniques, they were inheritances. Breaking those rules invited confrontation, and Bruce knew it. Several witnesses later said he expected some form of challenge. It was not a matter of if, but when, and from how many directions. What made this particular moment matter was Bruce's position at the time. He was transitioning, from student to instructor, from demonstrator to innovator. His ideas were still forming, his body still adapting to the speed he demanded of it. He was experimenting with footwork, distancing, and interception in ways that had not yet been fully tested under pressure. This was not a man settled into certainty. Tom H., the gym owner who would later be present during the confrontation, recalled Bruce in the weeks leading up to it as restless. He trained longer than anyone else in the room, but not harder in a reckless sense. He paused often. He repeated movements slowly, then suddenly at full speed, as if checking whether his control could keep up with his intent. There was also a quieter pressure. Bruce understood that one poorly handled encounter could validate every accusation against him, that he was reckless, disrespectful, and unfit to teach. Conversely, avoiding confrontation would confirm something else, that his ideas could not survive outside demonstration. The challenge that emerged in Oakland was never formally announced. No posters, no invitations. It moved through conversations, through warnings delivered indirectly, through people advising Bruce to be careful where you train. By the time the private location was chosen, the stakes were already set. This was not about proving dominance. It was about legitimacy, whether Bruce's evolving approach could withstand real resistance, in a confined space, against multiple bodies, without rules to protect him. One witness would later say, he knew if he lost control, he'd lose more than a fight. That awareness followed him into the room. The men who confronted Bruce that night did not arrive together, and they were not equal. Witnesses consistently identified one individual as the center of gravity, the man others deferred to, the one who spoke first. His name was never recorded in writing. In later recollections he was referred to only as the boxer or the senior. Tom H. remembered him as being in his early 30s, thick through the shoulders, with hands marked by old fractures that had healed crooked. This was not a street tough looking for spectacle. He had trained. Years of it. Some said boxing, others said Southern Chinese styles adapted for full contact. What mattered more was how he carried himself, feet set naturally, chin down, hands loose but ready. He did not bounce or posture. He watched distance. That alone made him dangerous. According to one witness, the challenger had attended 2 of Bruce's public demonstrations earlier that year. He stood at the back both times. He did not interrupt. He did not ask questions. Afterward, he reportedly told an associate, "He moves too freely. That kind of speed fails when pressure closes." The challenge was framed as concern, not insult. The man believed, sincerely, that Bruce's teaching was irresponsible. That speed without structural discipline encouraged chaos. That opening Chinese martial knowledge to outsiders weakened it. And that Bruce, young and outspoken, had not yet been tested in circumstances where control breaks down. This was not a publicity stunt because there was nothing to gain publicly. No audience, no announcement, no record. Losing would damage the challenger standing quietly. Winning would change nothing unless Bruce submitted. The risk was private and personal. What made the situation more volatile was that the challenger did not come alone. The other 4 men were not students in the traditional sense. They were associates, training partners, gym regulars, men accustomed to contact. None were novices. None were there to intervene unless necessary. Their presence was not meant to overwhelm immediately, but to eliminate escape and uncertainty. This was pressure by proximity. Tom H. recalled feeling uneasy the moment he realized the numbers. It wasn't a duel, he said later. It was a containment. Bruce noticed it too. Another witness, a young weightlifter named Ray M., remembered Bruce scanning the room when the last man entered. Not nervously, methodically. He adjusted his stance, rolled his shoulders once, and asked a single question, "Are we talking, or are we testing?" The challenger answered calmly. "We test." There were no formal rules discussed. No agreement on duration, no limits on contact, no referee. The unspoken understanding was simple: if Bruce lost control of the situation, no one would stop it for him. That reality introduced a moral tension that was not obvious from the outside. Bruce's skill advantage, if it existed, would be magnified by aggression. But excessive damage would confirm the very accusations leveled against him, that his approach was dangerous, undisciplined, and reckless. The challenger knew this. He stood close enough that Bruce could smell sweat and liniment oil on his forearms. He spoke quietly, so only Bruce could hear him. "You move fast," he said. "Let's see how you stop." For Bruce, the danger was not just physical injury. It was exposure, whether his evolving method could function under compression, against a trained opponent, with 4 additional bodies narrowing the margins. The room fell silent. No one stepped back. The room was a converted training space behind a small gym on the edge of Oakland's industrial district. Concrete floor. Exposed beams. One bare bulb hanging low enough that taller men had to mind their heads. The windows were covered, not for secrecy, witnesses said, but because the building backed onto an alley where break-ins were common. There was no ring. No ropes, no mats, no boundaries that favored footwork or reach. The usable space was roughly 12 feet across at its widest point, less once 5 men occupied it. When the door closed, the sound carried a finality that several witnesses remembered more clearly than any movement that followed. Tom H. checked the lock himself. He later said he did it out of habit, not intention, but the effect was the same. No one was leaving until it was over. Bruce Lee removed his shoes. Not ceremonially, quickly, as if to feel the floor. He flexed his toes once against the concrete, testing friction. His trousers were narrow, his shirt already damp at the collar. He was leaner than everyone else in the room, and that fact was not lost on anyone present. The challenger did not remove his shoes. That choice mattered. Rubber soles gave traction but limited pivoting. It suggested he expected forward pressure, not evasion. His associates spread out, not in a circle, but in staggered positions that closed angles without committing. They were not there to rush. They were there to make space collapse. No rules were spoken aloud. But there were assumptions. No weapons. No eye gouging. No biting. Beyond that, nothing was guaranteed. The absence of structure raised the stakes immediately. A single stumble could put Bruce against a wall with no room to recover. A fall would invite interference, intentional or not. Ray M. remembered Bruce glancing briefly at the corners of the room. He wasn't measuring the men, Ray said later. He was measuring exits. There were none. Emotionally, the atmosphere was restrained but charged. No shouting. No insults. The challenger's calm unsettled people more than anger would have. It suggested confidence, or at least acceptance of risk. Bruce mirrored that calm externally, but one witness noticed his breathing, shorter than usual, controlled but alert. This was not a demonstration. The moral tension was already present before the first movement. Bruce's methods emphasized interception and rapid resolution. In a crowded, rule-less space, those principles could end the encounter quickly, or escalate it beyond repair. Tom H. recalled thinking, if someone loses control here, it won't stop at one exchange. Bruce asked one final question, quietly, one at a time. The challenger did not answer immediately. He looked at his associates, then back at Bruce. If it stays clean, he said. That was the only condition offered. The men shifted their weight. One stepped closer to the wall, narrowing the gap behind Bruce. Another adjusted his stance, heel lifting slightly, ready to move. The challenger raised his hands, not in a classic guard, but low, elbows in, prepared to absorb and close. Bruce lowered his center of gravity by inches. His hands came up, palms open, fingers relaxed. He did not bounce. He did not circle. In the confined space, movement had to be economical. For a moment, nothing happened. That pause, those 2 seconds, was where several witnesses later said the danger peaked. Because once the first exchange began, there would be no way to slow it without someone getting hurt. The challenger stepped forward. Bruce did not retreat. The first movement was not explosive. It was deliberate. The challenger stepped in with his lead foot angled slightly inward, shoulders tight, hands rising late. It was a probing advance, designed to test reaction and force Bruce backward into the narrowing space behind him. One of the associates shifted at the same moment, not attacking, but closing the angle by half a step. That was when Bruce Lee moved. Witnesses disagreed afterward on what he did first, whether it was a strike, a step, or a redirection. What they agreed on was the timing. Bruce did not wait for the attack to complete. He entered during its formation, cutting forward instead of yielding ground. Ray M. described it as wrong-footing the room. Bruce's lead hand snapped out, not with full force, but with speed aimed at the challenger's eyes and upper cheek. It was not meant to injure permanently. It was meant to freeze. The challenger flinched just enough for Bruce to step inside the reach of the shoulders, where power compresses. At that distance, the challenger tried to clinch. His right arm came over the top, heavy and practiced, seeking to wrap Bruce's neck and drag him down. In a larger space, that might have worked. In the confined room, Bruce's proximity made it unstable. He shifted his weight sharply to his rear foot, rotated his hips, and drove a short strike, described by Tom H. as a punch, but without the wind-up, into the challenger's ribs. There was an audible sound. Not a crack, but a dull, internal thud. The challenger grunted and tightened, pain registering late. His balance faltered for a fraction of a second. Bruce used that moment to pivot offline, his shoulder brushing past the challenger's chest. It was a small movement, but it changed the geometry of the room. One associate stepped forward instinctively. Bruce reacted without turning fully. His rear hand snapped back in a back fist motion that caught the approaching man on the jaw. It was not a knockout blow. It was enough to stop momentum. The man staggered back, more surprised than injured. The challenger recovered quickly. He was experienced enough not to chase. He reset his stance, breathing heavier now, eyes sharper. He had felt Bruce's speed, and more importantly, his willingness to enter danger. The room tightened. Bruce's breathing had changed. Still controlled, but faster. His shirt clung to his back. A thin line of red marked his forearm where the challenger's grip had scraped skin. It was minor, but visible. This was the shift witnesses remembered most clearly, the moment when everyone realized the exchange would not stay contained to a single opponent. The associates no longer held their positions casually. They leaned in, weight forward, ready to close if Bruce stumbled. The challenger lowered his center further, abandoning probing tactics. He intended to pressure continuously now, force contact, test whether Bruce's precision could survive sustained collision. Bruce adjusted as well. He shortened his movements. His hands came closer to his face. His stance narrowed, trading mobility for stability. He was no longer demonstrating principles. He was adapting under threat. Tom H. later said, "That's when I understood, he wasn't in control of the room anymore. He was fighting to keep it from turning on him." The challenger surged forward again, this time with commitment. Bruce met him head-on. The second surge was heavier. The challenger closed the distance with his weight behind him, abandoning finesse for pressure. His shoulder drove forward, head tucked, forearms tight. It was a collision meant to break rhythm and force Bruce into the wall where numbers would matter. For the first time that night, Bruce Lee gave ground. His heel slid on concrete dust. His back brushed the rough surface of the wall, close enough that one misstep would pin him. An associate moved in from the side, not striking yet, but occupying space. Another edged closer behind Bruce, reducing the room to a narrow corridor of bodies. This was the danger Bruce had anticipated, and not fully controlled. The challenger pressed, forearm across Bruce's chest, attempting to smother movement. His breath was hot and labored now, but his balance held. He drove a short punch toward Bruce's midsection. It landed partially, the impact glancing but solid enough to draw a sharp exhale. Ray M. later said he heard Bruce grunt. Not loud. Controlled. But real. Bruce's face changed. Witnesses described it as a tightening around the eyes, a momentary narrowing of focus. He was calculating, not just escape, but consequence. In that compressed space, any full-force strike to the head could drop a man onto concrete. Any loss of restraint could cascade into the others joining in. Yet restraint carried its own risk. The challenger attempted to hook Bruce's leg, aiming to dump him sideways. Bruce reacted instinctively, shifting weight and driving his elbow down into the challenger's shoulder joint. There was a sharp sound, bone on bone, and the challenger's arm buckled slightly. He did not scream. But his posture collapsed inward. That was the opening. Bruce could have followed with a full strike to the head. Several witnesses believed that was the moment where the encounter could have ended decisively, and brutally. Instead, Bruce hesitated, just long enough to redirect. He stepped inside the challenger's compromised arm, trapped it against his own body, and twisted sharply while sweeping the leg. The movement was fast, but controlled, designed to unbalance rather than destroy. The challenger hit the floor hard, shoulder first, then hip. His head missed the concrete by inches. He stayed down, not unconscious, but stunned, clutching his arm at an unnatural angle. The room reacted instantly. One associate lunged forward in anger. Bruce met him with a straight kick to the thigh, low, direct, disabling without spectacle. The man collapsed to one knee, breath knocked loose. Another froze. Tom H. later said this was the moment he feared most. Everything could have gone bad right there, he recalled. One more second, and it would have turned into something ugly. Bruce stepped back. His chest rose and fell rapidly now. His hands were up, but open. He did not pursue. He did not posture. He spoke, quietly, voice tight with adrenaline, enough. The word was not a demand. It was a line drawn. The challenger, still on the floor, nodded once. Pain had stripped the argument from him. The associates did not move. The room held its breath. Bruce lowered his hands slowly. Later, when asked why he stopped when he had advantage, Bruce did not give a philosophical answer. According to Ray M., he simply said, "If I went further, I wouldn't recognize myself." That admission lingered in the room longer than the fight itself. The danger had not been hypothetical. Bruce had been tested, physically compressed, injured, surrounded. He had chosen control at the edge of loss. And everyone there knew how close it had come to crossing that edge. No one spoke for several seconds after it ended. The challenger remained seated on the concrete, back against the wall, breathing through clenched teeth. His arm was already swelling, the joint stiffening into an angle that suggested damage beyond bruising. One associate helped him up carefully, avoiding the shoulder. Another opened the door, letting in a strip of cold night air that cut through the smell of sweat and dust. Bruce Lee stood alone near the center of the room. Witnesses remembered his hands most clearly, not raised, not clenched, but trembling slightly as the adrenaline drained. He rolled his shoulders once, winced, and pressed his fingers briefly into his own ribs, testing for injury. There was a shallow mark along his side where the punch had landed, already darkening. He did not hide it. Tom H. said Bruce looked relieved, but not proud. No one declared a winner. There was no acknowledgement of victory, no formal ending. The challenger met Bruce's eyes once before leaving. He did not apologize. He did not challenge again. According to one witness, he simply said, "I see it now." What he meant was never clarified. The men dispersed quietly. By the time the building was empty, the room felt larger than it had before, as if the tension had been structural, holding the walls in. In the days that followed, there were no rumors circulated publicly. No boasts. No warnings. The story survived only in fragments, passed carefully between people who understood the consequences of exaggeration. Each telling emphasized something different: the speed, the restraint, the danger of numbers. What did not change was how Bruce behaved afterward. Several students noticed he altered his training. He spent more time working in confined spaces. He practiced starting from disadvantage, back to the wall, limited footing, interrupted balance. He spoke less about technique and more about decision-making under pressure. Ray M. recalled asking him once whether the encounter had proven his ideas. Bruce shook his head. "It showed me where they break," he said. The confrontation did not harden him into brutality. It sharpened his caution. Witnesses said he became more aware of how quickly skill could turn into irreversible harm, especially when fear entered the room. He did not regret defending himself. He did not glorify it either. Years later, when Bruce's public image had grown larger than his private history, those present still measured him by that night in Oakland, not by dominance, but by restraint under compression. Tom H. summed it up best: long after the details had faded, he wasn't the most dangerous man because of what he could do. He was dangerous because he knew exactly when to stop, and how close he'd come to not stopping at all. After that, no one who witnessed it ever mistook his speed for recklessness again.